Hello and welcome to the Tough Cover Podcast. It is July 13th and we are kicking off the 2021 fantasy football season here on the Tough Cover Podcast live on the Painted Lines. Please follow at Mark Henry Jr. _ and at Tough Cover Pod on Twitter and at The Painted Lines, and subscribe to The Painted Lines on YouTube. The Tough Cover Podcast has been the place you come to on The Painted Lines for over 4 months now for sports gambling, and it is now also going to be the place going forward for fantasy football content. The plan is to kick off the fantasy football draft season here and do 4 positional breakdown podcasts this week and next week for quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, and tight ends, and keep all 4 combined under an hour so anyone out there not watching live can prepare for their fantasy football drafts in under an hour with info on all 4 positions. So today we're starting it off at quarterback, and I will be breaking down my top 20 and at the end explaining why I'm higher on some guys than consensus and why I'm lower on some guys than consensus. If you disagree with me, leave it in the comments live. If you're watching later, leave it on the comments on YouTube. So it's almost a bit of an overrated, underrated, sleeper bust game. So thank you folks who are with me watching live. And if you check this video out later on, there may be some fancy highlights and graphics spliced in by my guy Dives at Mr. Crockpot. Give him a follow. So the goal is for you guys to be able to watch these whenever you need to go prepare for your fantasy drafts out there, whenever that may be. I know that there's a wide range of when people do their fantasy drafts. I'm going to try to keep some things simple, not get too crazy analytical on you guys, but we'll give out some stats when needed. So starting off with quarterback, before we get to my top 20, this position comes down to philosophy more than anything else. Are you a guy or girl who will pull the trigger on a high QB in the third to sixth round in that area? Or are you a guy who will wait and take a QB or 2 QBs in the later rounds? Well, I'm here to tell you that I've done both, and both can work, both can fail. So more so than just adhering to a strict philosophy, you have to set specific values on guys. So I'm here to help you navigate who your targets should be this year at quarterback, regardless of if you're an early or a late round picking of the quarterback guy. If I'm picking a quarterback high personally, I'm aiming for safety. I'm aiming to hit a double. I'm aiming to hit a triple. I'm really just trying to make sure that I get a top 7 or top 8 quarterback when I'm picking a quarterback high. I'm not necessarily picking a guy because I think they can be the number 1 quarterback if I'm picking a guy high. But if I'm waiting on a QB and taking a pair late or something like that, I'm trying to hit a home run and win my league like people did with Justin Herbert last year, who picked him up off the free agency or who drafted him late, like people did with Lamar Jackson a few years ago, like people did, like I did with Patrick Mahomes years ago in his first starting year for Kansas City. And you'll see that reflected in my rankings, that I kind of give some value in the mid to late guys in terms of their upside. And I'm a little more risk averse at the top, a little more playing it safe in the top 8. So my rankings are based on PPR, 4 points per passing touchdown, ESPN and CBS standard scoring. And to help understand what consensus was, I used a handful of 10 fantasy analysts from ESPN and CBS to get an idea of what the high and the low range of some of these players were. And we're going to start it off. We're going to start my rankings off with the best player in football, maybe the best quarterback I've ever seen, my favorite draft child of all time, Patrick Mahomes, who I have as the number 1 fantasy quarterback. No one of the fantasy analysts I looked at had him anything other than number 1. He finished higher on a per game basis than Josh Allen and Aaron Rodgers, even though he finished 3rd last year. In my opinion, he's one of the safest picks in fantasy. You know exactly what you're going to get from Patrick Mahomes. In a down year last year, he gave you 4,740 yards, 38 touchdowns, and 6 picks. And that was in a relatively down year for Patrick Mahomes. When you have guys like Tyreek Hill, like Travis Kelce, like a guy like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who does produce in the passing game, and we expect him to produce more in the passing game, and a guy like Mecole Hardman, who obviously has such high potential if he can figure it out. He just has so many weapons on top of being so damn talented. So Patrick Mahomes is my number 1 fantasy QB for the pure fact that he would have been number 1 had he played week 17 last year, probably. So let's go to the comments. Number 1 pick, Jalen Hurts, baby. I have Jalen Hurts just as high as kind of the normal fantasy community. So we'll get there in a little bit. So we're moving to number 2. My number 2 pick is quarterback Josh Allen. He was the number 1 QB last year. He had worse passing numbers than Mahomes, even though he finished ahead of them with one more game played. But where he really made up that ground was 100 more rush yards and 8 rush touchdowns compared to Patrick Mahomes 2. So I've heard a lot of people suggest, Josh Allen, that 8 rushing touchdown number may be, something that he could decrease and that could hurt Josh Allen in fantasy. He's never rushed for less than 8 in his career, though. 8 in a shortened sample size in his rookie year, 9 in his sophomore year, and then 8 last year. So I don't necessarily know if 8 rush touchdowns is an anomaly, especially when you have only really Devin Singletary and Zach Moss at running back. I still expect Josh Allen to get a lot of rushing touchdowns. So that is why I'm not exactly nervous at all about regression in that area. They lost John Brown, added Emmanuel Sanders. I actually think John Brown's probably better than Emmanuel Sanders at this point, so I didn't necessarily love that. But pretty much everything else is the same. Same mode line, same running backs. Stephon Diggs is still there, still an absolute stud. Cole Beasley still there in the slot. So a lot of the same concepts going forward for Josh Allen. Should be onwards and upwards and should be only better from here. He's a really safe MVP pick. So number 2, Josh Allen. And then that is a tier, in my opinion. So tier 1 to me is quarterback Patrick Mahomes. Tier 1 of the quarterbacks, Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. So moving on to tier 2, another 2 QB tier here. I've got Lamar Jackson, my guy, over my shoulder here, the Louisville jersey. He was the number 10 QB last year, and in my opinion, that is his floor. That's the absolute floor for Lamar Jackson. They added Sammy Watkins. They added Rashad Bateman. They should be the best receivers he's ever played with in his career. Seriously, if you're sitting there and you're not a Lamar Jackson guy, be honest with yourself and tell yourself, who is the best receiver he's ever played with? I'm going to give it 5 seconds. It's probably Willie Snead. Just to be honest, it's either Willie Snead or the corpse of Des Bryant. That's a joke. And we're getting Sammy Watkins, we're getting Rashad Bateman. Those guys are not going to be world beaters year one. I don't think either of them are going to get 1,000 yards or anything like that. But they still should be the best receivers he's ever played with. And obviously Hollywood Brown hopefully is better in a complementary role. But obviously, like I said, these rankings are based on 4 points per passing touchdown leagues. Lamar Jackson was number 1 in 4 and 6 points per passing touchdown leagues 2 years ago. So even though he was number 10 last year, you know the upside. And I think that number 10 is his absolute floor. He probably would not be my number 3 QB in 6 points per passing touchdown league, but in a 4 point per passing touchdown league, no doubt about it, I'm going Lamar Jackson. And it's same deal here in a 4 points per passing touchdown league at number 4. I'm going no doubt about it, Kyler Murray, he's ranked anywhere from 3 to 6. Lamar Jackson's ranked anywhere from 2 to 5. So these guys are ranked kind of next to each other in a lot of people's rankings. Kyler was the number 4 QB last year, with number 1 QB through the first 12 weeks. He averaged 15.83 points over his last 6 games, which wouldn't be good for like the top 25 on average. Really struggled over the last 6 games, and most people seem to think that was his shoulder. So maybe that is just that's all. There's no concerns there. I think that a lot of the talk that he said he can't run. He needs to run less. He needs to rely on his arm. I don't know if that's just like player speak. I've heard so many mobile quarterbacks say that over the year, and it's probably a trope alert, as the guys at the Around the NFL podcast would say. But it does seem like in the past, in the early on in the season, he's like trying not to run. He's trying his hardest to be a pocket passer. And for fantasy, you need Kyler Murray running and gunning, and you need him getting out of the pocket. So that is definitely concerning. And he wasn't getting out of the pocket. And many say that is due to a shoulder injury to close last year. He had 11 rush touchdowns after 4 the year before. So as opposed to Josh Allen, who had a rush touchdown number consistent with the rest of his career, Kyler took a massive jump here. So that is something that could fall back. And Hopkins obviously gives him a very high floor. They have A.J. Green. They have Christian Kirk. So he has a very high floor, Kyler Murray. That's why I have him number 4 here. I would go Lamar over him because I think Lamar has a bit higher of upside because we've seen Lamar be the MVP and be the number one passing quarterback or anything quarterback in fantasy. He had the most pass touchdowns 2 years ago. So I think a lot of people forget that when they talk about Lamar in fantasy and how much better of a passer he has to be. He probably just has to be to the level he was 2 years ago. So I'll take him over Kyler, even though I do think Kyler being down in a lot of games is going to help his stock. So let's move on. This is someone I'm going to spend a little time on, and then I'm going to try to go rapid fire after that. Justin Herbert is my number 5 quarterback. Out of the 10 analysts, no one had him higher than 7th, and no one had him lower than 11th. So I am higher on Justin Herbert than anyone else I've seen in the fantasy industry. He was the number 9 QB last year, would have been number 8 on average. Since he played 15 games, since he didn't start week 1. Eckler and him only played 8 games together. You have to think Austin Eckler is a guy that's going to help a young quarterback as a safety blanket out of the pocket. He should benefit him in both ways, being able to block, taking pressure off him in the run game, and being able to catch passes. So I think Austin Eckler is really an X factor for Justin Herbert's fantasy here. He had 4,340 yards, 31 touchdowns, and 10 picks with 250 rush yards, I think, and 5 rushing touchdowns. So to me, in 15 games, and knowing that he wasn't the starter all offseason, knowing that Austin Eckler wasn't healthy all year, knowing he'll have a better rapport with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, I think he has 5,000 yard, 40 touchdown, 10 pick potential, 5+ touchdown potential. I think that if Austin Eckler and Keenan Allen stay healthy, Justin Herbert could easily be the number 1 QB in fantasy. So I think if I'll be taking a QB high, there's a good likelihood that it's going to be Justin Herbert. So moving on to this is the third tier with Justin Herbert and now Russell Wilson. So tier 1, Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. Tier 2, Lamar Jackson and Kyler Murray. Tier 3, Justin Herbert and Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson was the number 6 QB last year. Doesn't add as much on the ground as you think. At first, when I was putting together my rankings, you'd say, 4 point per passing touchdown. So rush touchdowns are obviously at a higher premium. Rush should be higher. But you really look at it, he hasn't had more than 3 rush touchdowns since 2014. He only had 2 last season. The reason he was so good last season was he had 40 passing touchdowns. Now, I don't know if that's repeatable, but he's obviously one of the best quarterbacks in football. Let Russ cook, especially with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett out there. That's why I have him number 6. He seems extremely safe. Hopefully he adds more on the ground if he does decrease in pass touchdown rate. So let's get to the next tier this is tier 4, and these are guys I'm not going to have due to too much uncertainty. At number 7, I have Aaron Rodgers, who's the number 2 quarterback last season and the MVP. Can't talk much about Rodgers without talking about his situation. I won't be buying in until I know if he's in Green Bay or where he'll be elsewhere. Same thing with Deshaun Watson. By the way, I didn't even rank Deshaun Watson in this top 20. I'm assuming he's not playing, and I'm kind of assuming that Aaron Rodgers will play for Green Bay and that Deshaun Watson won't play this year. So that's what I'm working under. So let's get to number 8, and let's get to my number 1 guy that I'm low on compared to consensus, Dak Prescott, who was amazing last year when healthy, Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, CeeDee Lamb, an amazing trio. I'm just, like I said at the top, I'm injury risk averse, and I'm just very focused on safety if I'm going to be using a high pick at the quarterback position, because the quarterback position is the hardest in fantasy to recover from if you use a high pick and that player gets hurt, in my opinion. Now, will his injury cause him to sacrifice rushing? That's something that I'm also a bit concerned about for Dak Prescott, especially with people that are just projecting his stats over the first couple games last year. I do think that he'll help CeeDee Lamb take a huge leap. I think Gallup could take a leap, but I do think that Zeke will be more involved this year. They will be running the ball more, and I think Amari Cooper will be taking a step back. So I'm not as huge on Dak Prescott as most. He's only the range I saw in the 10 fantasy analysts I looked at was 3 was his highest and 5 was his lowest. I'm all the way down at 8. I won't have any shares of Dak Prescott in fantasy, and I'm fine with that. So let's move on to a guy I think I may have some shares of over my left shoulder here. Jalen Hurts. I have him as my number 9 QBs, anywhere from 8 to 11 in the 10 fantasy analysts I looked at. He averaged 25 points in his 3 starts. Devonta Smith is NFL ready. Offense is geared around Jalen Hurts' strengths, in my opinion. Miles Sanders will have a better season with Jalen Hurts, as running backs always do with running quarterbacks. I think Kenny Gainwell will also help out a lot. Rushing gives him a very high floor in a similar way to Lamar Jackson and Kyler Murray, and it also gives him a very high upside. I've heard some fantasy analysts even say that outside of the top 5 or so QBs, he is the QB that is most likely to take a wild jump and finish in the top 2 or 3 fantasy quarterbacks, and I could see that just as well. I think that Jalen Hurts will be an absolute monster in fantasy football. Tom Brady at number 10. He was the number 8 quarterback last season, and it feels like things went perfectly. He's ranked anywhere from 8th to 10th in fantasy circles. So I guess I'm on the lower end of the spectrum on Tom Brady. He has Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown, obviously an amazing duo, not even to mention Gronk and O.J. Howard at tight end, and not to mention Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette at running back. They are an absolutely stacked offense. But if Brady finished 8th last season, can Brady finish 7th if he didn't last year? I don't really see how Brady can improve too much on last year's stats, other than obviously, more continuity in the same offense, I guess. But I think if anything, they'll try to run the ball more to take pressure off Tom Brady and to take pressure off of the O-line. So that's why I have him here at number 10, even with an amazing offense. So here, moving on to the next tier beyond that, I have Ryan Tannehill as my number 11 quarterback. He is a wide range on the fantasy analyst ranked from anywhere from 7th to 13th, so I'm smack dab in the middle. He was the number 7 QB last year. He's adding Julio, so I can't blame people who want him very high. Brady is just a tad safer to me. That's why he's a bit higher. Tannehill probably has more upside. He did lose Corey Davis, Jonnu Smith, Adam Humphries, and most importantly, Arthur Smith. So that's why I have him at 11 and not a little bit higher. At number 12, a guy I absolutely love and a guy I will have a ton of. Trevor Lawrence is going to be a guy I own stock in since I ranked him 12th, and he is anywhere from 13th to 16th for the experts. DJ Chark, Laviska Shenault, and Marvin Jones give Trevor such a high upside and a high floor, in my opinion. Travis Etienne should give him familiarity and should give him some help catching the ball out of the backfield, since he was working out as a receiver all season, which everyone got all upset about. I think it should help them. I think that Jacksonville is going to be a good team. I think it's going to be a good offense, and I think Trevor Lawrence has really, really high upside in a similar way to Justin Herbert last year. At number 13, I have Matthew Stafford. He's ranked anywhere from 11th to 16th, so I'm in the middle on him. He was the number 16 QB last year, obviously in a new environment with Sean McVay, Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp. Makes Stafford an exciting option, a guy I gave out an MVP future on the Everything's Fine podcast. So I absolutely love Matt Stafford. He's a good dark horse to win MVP, and he's a good dark horse to finish top 5 among fantasy QBs. At number 14, and the end of this tier, so Joe Burrow is a guy I'm actually a little lower on than most. He's ranked anywhere from 12th to 13th, not a wide range for Burrow. So I have him 14th, so I imagine I won't have a lot of shares of him. He was a bit disappointing to me last year, even when he was healthy. Number 18 on average. I know the Bengals O-line's a dumpster fire. I think Zach Taylor's an idiot. I kind of don't know if either of those things are fixed yet, but they do have Jamar Chase. And Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, and T. Higgins is a nasty trio. But again, I'm injury risk averse at the QB position. So I think that Joe Burrow has an insanely high upside. But with his injury risk, I don't see myself taking that risk very often on Joe Burrow. So this is moving on to the next tier, 15 through 20. These are guys I'm not very excited about. There's one or two guys that I think has high upside in there, but there's such a low floor that I kind of do think that you want to get your starting quarterback out of those first 14 guys. And even though I was just spoke negatively about Joe Burrow, I obviously understand the upside. So if you want to get your starting quarterback late, I would say you really have to target that Trevor Lawrence, Matthew Stafford, Joe Burrow tier to make, or Jalen Hurts if he falls, to make sure you get a quarterback before Matt Ryan and before some of these guys. And that's who I have up next, Matt Ryan at 15. He's ranked anywhere from 14th to 21st on the rankings. Number 12 QB last year, still no running back, so he's going to be throwing the ball a ton, but he still has a bad O-line. But they are replacing Dan Quinn with Arthur Smith, which Matt Ryan has to be so goddamn happy with. That is such a huge upgrade. Arthur Smith is a genius. Dan Quinn is a buffoon. So that will help the offense and it will help Matt Ryan. But they're replacing Julio with Kyle Pitts. Now, I'm the biggest Kyle Pitts guy in the world, and I still don't necessarily know if that's an upgrade at this point, especially. So that's definitely not something to be necessarily excited about. So Matt Ryan's weirdly safe, but weirdly has a lot of questions to be so safe. So that's why I'm a little bit lower on him than I guess not the consensus if I have him 15 and he's 14 to 21. So I'm right in the middle on Matt Ryan, but I'm not too excited to be taking Matt Ryan in any leagues. And a guy I am actually a little bit excited to take here at number 16 is Carson Wentz. He's ranked anywhere from 18th to 28th, so this is a guy I'm much higher on than consensus. He's the perfect backup QB to take a lottery ticket on, in my opinion, or to anything. If you want to go late, you take a Trevor Lawrence and a Carson Wentz, and I think you have pretty high chance of one of those guys busting or booming, and either finishing top 5 or not finishing in the top 20. But I think the chance of either of them finishing in the top 5 is pretty high. Or if you want to go, Lamar Jackson and then Carson Wentz, and then if Lamar Jackson's awesome, Carson Wentz overperforms, and you have a trade chip. So I always love doing stuff like that and making the backup QB I take high upside. So that's why I'm high on Carson Wentz here. He was the number 10 fantasy QB in 2019, obviously much higher than that in 2017 when he was healthy. Phillip Rivers, as the Indy Colts QB last year, was number 19, and I think Wentz is still at a better point of his career than Phillip Rivers was at in his. So I don't love the weapons here in Indy, but I love the upside. Wentz was the number 10 QB, like I said, in 2019, and his weapons were even worse then. So Carson Wentz is the number 16 fantasy QB. Moving on to number 17, Kirk Cousins. He's ranked anywhere from 16th to 25th. He was the number 11 QB last year. He's a less exciting version of Matt Ryan, basically. Will finish top 15, but definitely won't finish top 10. It's pretty insane that he consistently finishes in that 10 to 15 range every single year. Kellen Mond? Question mark? Maybe. Who knows? So moving on to number 18 overall, and this is a guy I will die on the hill for, Tua Tagovailoa. He's ranked anywhere 15 to 26. I actually think I might end up bumping him up over Kirk Cousins. He is just a guy that it's hard not to be excited about given the weapons that he has. Obviously, a lot of people didn't like what they saw out of Tua last year. I was much higher on what I saw than most. I think that they kept the handcuffs on him. Changalia is gone. There's a new OC, and you have Jalen Waddle, Devontae Parker, Will Fuller, Mike Gesicki, Myles Gaskin. So really, I made a lot of excuses for Tua last year. I didn't think that any of the receivers could create any separation. I didn't think that what they were having Tua do was conducive to what Tua is good at. So it was frustrating for me. I think that he absolutely could finish as a top 10 QB, and that's why I have him a bit higher than some of the guys that, there's some people who don't have him ranked as a top 20 QB. I have him here at 18. I could see myself bumping him up. Any running is obviously a bonus for Tua because of the hip injury. It seems like that has kind of been taken out of his game. He did it a bit more in college, but still not. He wasn't Lamar Jackson or anything, but I could see him having a bit more rushing production, maybe rushing touchdown production. So number 19 and 20 are both pretty boring. I have Derek Carr, Baker Mayfield. They're pretty boring options. Derek Carr, number 13 QB last year. I feel bad for Derek Carr. Everyone knows it. I'm a Derek Carr stan. He finished 13th with a missed game and no weapons, and he then lost Nelson Aguilar. He has Henry Ruggs, he has John Brown, he has Willie Snead. Not exactly exciting, but I think somehow, and he obviously has Darren Waller, but somehow I think he will persevere. That obviously those receivers need to step up to help Waller. Kenyon Drake adds a bit of passing production in the passing game from the running back spot that Josh Jacobs wasn't bringing. So there's a lot of kind of parallels, in my opinion, between Matt Ryan, Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, Baker Mayfield, who was the number 17 QB last year, Odell coming back, but still, even with Odell, this is going to be a rushing offense. So another guy with limited upside here in Baker Mayfield. The offense is committed to Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, so that's why I have Baker at number 20. But I have him above all of the rookies just because Justin Fields, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, there hasn't been any announcement on who's starting. Now, if Justin Fields is starting day one, now I think he's a top 15 quarterback. I'd probably rank him at number 14, right in front of Burrow, right behind Stafford and Lawrence, because I think he's NFL ready, and I think his what he brings on the ground and that offense with Allen Robinson is ready to produce right away. So I think that I think that Justin Fields has a really high upside. I obviously didn't rank him in my top 20 because I don't think he's going to start the first few games, but that is why he wasn't on the list. So let's recap guys I'm high on, guys I'm low on. So the guys I'm high on, or higher on than consensus, I should say, are Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence, and Carson Wentz. And the guys I'm lower on than consensus are Dak Prescott, Joe Burrow, and Ben Roethlisberger. So thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for being a part of the Tough Cover Click, and check me out tomorrow. Well, I went a little longer than I meant to. Hopefully I'll keep it a little shorter tomorrow for tight ends. I'm only going to do my top 12, and I will give you the guys that I will be targeting and the guys that I absolutely will not be targeting at the tight end position. So thanks for watching. Thanks for commenting along, Dives. If you're watching this later, please give the Painted Lines a subscription on YouTube, turn on post notifications, and thank you guys for watching, and enjoy the winners.